And hopefully Larry will get here. It is Larry, correct?
That's right.
Okay. I sent him a note, and if you do too,
Me
maybe
too.
we'll find it. So welcome to Teachers Teaching Teachers. We are starting, what I'm imagining is a few weeks, and it could go longer or shorter, whatever, and an ongoing project really of looking at different tools that we might use to connect students and to connect to each other and to texts. And tonight is all about hypothesis. And we've invited some teachers who have used it, who are excited about it, and I think a few others may be joining us as well. And Jeremy Dean, who is the education whatever person at Hypothesis. Great to have you. So next week, just to say, next week will be Dan Dorenberg will be with us from NowComment, and then we'll hope to put together a Genius show right after that. And then my video about on K-12 online conference is going to try to look at some of that also. And if you look at Youth Voices, if all three of those are all over the missions, embedded here and there, and we're kind of trying to figure out, if I could put it this way, trying to figure out what tools work best for where, and you know, we probably have too many we're messing with right now, but we're kind of sifting through it and trying to figure it out. And so, welcome. Jared, actually, yeah, Jeremy, go ahead. Introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Jeremy Dean. I'm a former English teacher. I have a PhD in English literature, so I also taught at the college level and the high school level. I'm the former education czar of Rap Genius, so I spent 2.5 years founding and heading their education outreach arm. So I can speak to their service and to the politics of that platform as well. And now I'm at Hypothesis, which a lot of you guys know, but I'll just state real quickly, is a nonprofit open source web annotation application, foremost as a browser extension, but there's some other ways to access online documents and PDFs in HTML and PDF format. And so now I'm doing the same thing I did at Genius, trying to get educators and support educators using this annotation technology, and it's a pretty great gig, honestly. I really enjoy these conversations, and I enjoy the work. So.
Very cool. And Terry Elliott was going to join us as well. If you're out there, Terry, hopefully he'll join us, and Chris Sloan was going to join us. And I think of that to say that I wanted to say at the beginning also that we know that these aren't the only 3 tools out there. There are a few others that people are using, but you have to limit the experiment somehow. Shantanu, do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about what your students did last spring with Hypothesis?
Hi, I'm Shantanu Saha. I'm a teacher at the Baccalaureate School of Global Education in New York City, and last year I had 9th and 10th grade students in my 9th and 10th grade advisories working on Youth Voices, and we started working with Hypothesis, and we had a few weeks there where we were producing some very good stuff.
You used Do Now, right? KQED's Do Now?
Right, the KQED Do Nows, and aside from a few technical glitches that we were experiencing the first week or so, it ran pretty well. The kids were able to create a sustained dialogue over the articles that they saw, and once we worked out the technical issues, I think that the main technical issue was where to annotate on a YouTube video when we were watching that, because they didn't know where to start. And so once we figured out, here, just start here, and they have fewer problems.
So that'll be a good question to get into, other media annotation.
Right.
Greg? So, introductions and...
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm Gregory. I have been playing with Hypothesis going on almost a year now, and working with Jeremy, here and there, just helping him out with tips and tricks that I learn, and learning from him tips and tricks that he picks up from other people. That like he's like what Christopher's doing, and with, learning from like people like Chantou and sorry, these shows are always so late for me.
Greg, where do you teach?
Southern Connecticut State University, and I teach. So I teach a lot in pre-teaching teachers, and I'm using Hypothesis in almost every one of my classes. And it's actually become an integral role of my pedagogy. Instead of discussion forums, I'm finding like, instead of talking about the books with my students, I'm reading the books with my students, and it's really shifted my instruction in that way.
Say more. What do you mean?
Well, it's hard. We're currently in that phase of just, does this technology work? So they're not getting into the annotations of the first set of annotations when you introduce the tool are always a little rough, because I'm introducing 4,000 other tools at the same time. So there's some head explosions going on. But as the course develops, in blended learning and online learning, we were too used to that traditional discussion board. Here's, read this post, and discussion director puts up the question, and then then you respond. And that was usually me as a professor talking about what I've already read, while hoping my students had read the same as well. Whereas now I'm reading with my students almost in real time. I'm more active than the students, especially at the beginning as I add in additional scaffolds. But in terms of social reading, I'm thinking about, they still are blogging about their writing, but actually being able to watch my students read has been fun. And there is a challenge at the beginning. Right now, they're currently at the, well, what do you mean? How many annotations do I need to do to get an A stage? And I'm like, no, think about this like your textbook. How would you normally annotate that? If this was just a normal off the bookshelf, how would you annotate that? Just do the same, but stick in a funny image. The idea really, though, is like, it's in terms of my teaching, it has shifted me into the text versus talking about the text. It's probably the best way to do it.
So I absolutely have started to think about, when I invite people, students or teachers, to annotate either using any of these tools, that what we are doing is actually setting up discussion boards, but with the text there, right? So, yeah. So comparing the experience to discussion, like that was really interesting. But just to be clear, you're saying that because your comments and the text are on the same page.
But it's not just the comments and the text on the same page. It's watching thinking evolve, watching. I'm imagining being able to look at their growth over time in terms of their critical analysis. If I were to grab the first set of annotations are always a little rough baseline because it has a lot of tech issues going involved. But there's, I hate to say data there, but there's some phenomenal reading process data there.
It's coming in real time. I mean, I just shared one of your streams on the little chat pad, Greg, and I sit there sometimes and just watch Greg's kids annotate. I can see that. I mean, normally when I would assign reading, you'd kind of write the pages on the board at the end of class and then hope that something was done with it in the 24 hours before the next class period or whatever it was, and then come in and talk about it with that assumption. But now it's, it could be a 24-hour sort of conversation around the text preceding the class conversation. That's how I interpret your distinction, Greg, and I think it's a really, really valuable one.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the stream because I was teaching today, but I see one student asking, what does this word mean? And then other ones, it's still, though, I'm trying to model it as well, it's still a stream of reading of one. We're reading the same text, but we're all still reading it. I haven't got it to meld yet. into a social reading experience. They're all reading the same text alone together at the same time. It's like it's like you go into a coffee shop now. Everybody's in the same place, but they're all on their own phones. What I need to do is have them get into the text together. But I'm hoping, those are Jeremy posted. You should post a link to your blog post, Jeremy, with the top 10 ideas to do. I'm going to start trying to use some of these activities to see if I can kind of not force, but scaffold in more of the community, and then pull the activities away and see if the community stays. Because looking at that, I'm the only one replying to the annotations. There's very little replies going on.
So just to say, and as we bring Chris in, that to my mind for this community is like what the biggest affordance that I'm looking for with all these tools is. Is there ongoing conversation? So it's not just like student doing one shot and then teacher responding kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm kind of interested in. Great, Larry got here. Thank you. Kristen, we'll have you introduce yourself in just a second. It looks like you can hear us. Can we hear you?
Hello.
Perfect. Okay, welcome. Keep talking. We'll get Kristen and
you want me to keep? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead. Introduce yourself, Larry.
Oh, Larry Hanley. I teach in the English department at San Francisco State University, and I'm using Hypothesis this semester in my American Lit class.
Great. Say a little more. How are you using it?
Basically, I'm using it as an annotation tool, obviously, but to annotate the class texts. So the students, they'll read Henry Adams, a chapter from the Dynamo and the Virgin, and then they'll use it to annotate Henry Adams before the class where we discuss the text. And it's installed on my WordPress, so I'm using a WordPress plugin.
And what's the URL of that?
I just shared it in the chat.
Okay, good. But if somebody's listening, is it short enough? Yeah, probably.
I shared the yellow wallpaper.
Okay.
I just want to say real quickly while Larry's here that I'm absolutely inspired by the work that he's doing. I think it's a really amazing use of the tool, especially the integration of Hypothesis into WordPress, just from a technical standpoint, which is, we have a WordPress plugin. But if you open up this Charlotte Perkins Gilman story, there's 133 annotations on just this page. It's 133 comments by students. How many students are there, Larry?
I'd say there's about 35 students.
So that's at least 3 or 4, maybe per student. Maybe one's doing 6 or 7. But like, that's I mean, you know better than I. You've read through them all probably, but that is some serious engagement. That's some serious word count that they're accumulating. And this is just one of the texts. I mean, this is Larry and his class are basically putting together their own Norton anthology of poetry with the students as the editors, and I just think it's really amazing.
And you have an RSS feed on it too, right? So that when a student comments, it pops up on that site, right?
Yeah. So the RSS feed, what I've done is I've taken the RSS feed off the Hypothesis. I guess it's the master stream or the global stream.
Thank you. It's an Atom feed. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
we
you.
have RSS now, though, FYI.
Oh, okay. Good.
Oh,
we just got RSS recently. But
I get the feed from that, and then I put it into a widget on WordPress, and so that the most recent 10 annotations show up, for each text. It's on the homepage of the WordPress site.
Great.
Yeah, I stole that idea. As soon as Jeremy shared your WordPress site, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I can do that with my RSS feed. And then I was like, went and had to go build a feed just for my comments. So I was like, your page is awesome. It's been a guide for me as another teacher. So thank you.
Worth saying, there is some back-end preparation. Like you've had to find the text. It looked like you put a lot of the text on the site itself. Is that right?
Yeah, all the texts are on the site. So I just put them up as pages on WordPress. Mm-hmm. The back-end part, the initial installation, once you have the text up and you have the plugin activated on WordPress, that's pretty basic. Doing the RSS feed is a little bit more complicated. And then the other thing is So if you look at the yellow wallpaper page, I don't have it with me, in front of me now, but you'll see on the front page of the WordPress, the blog, the recent annotations are there, but I didn't want them to run through on all the text pages. It would just create a lot of clutter. So you have to go into WordPress and cancel the RSS feed for each of the pages. You know what I mean? So you can take that column out on the right-hand side.
Right. I have not been good at introductions here. Anna Smith, Chris Sloan, and Chris Rogers. Could the three of you introduce yourselves in that order, alphabetically? Anna, welcome.
All right, hi, I'm Anna Smith. Happy to join in. I've watched Hypothesis from the side. I haven't been able to dig in much about it, but really interested in all the different ways that we see annotation bubbling up all over. And I don't know if you guys saw this. I can't remember what it was. Was it the New York Times? Somewhere, someone recently, their article was an annotation of an old report. There was a history professor annotated. What report was that? Anyone know off the top of their head?
Moynihan?
Not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, Moynihan. And so it provided history and what was the definition of certain terms at that time and now, and so that was the article itself. It wasn't like an addition to it. It was an annotation of it, and so I loved seeing this kind of thing as a genre itself. So I'm excited to talk to you guys tonight.
Great. Welcome. Chris Sloan.
Hi, I'm Chris Sloan. I teach English and media for high school students at Judge Memorial in Salt Lake City. And so this summer I used Hypothesis with some teachers that I was teaching. They were getting their masters in ed tech. And so that was interesting. And then, I'm foreseeing some uses, like with Paul, with the students on Youth Voices this fall. Then I'm also interested in, as I understand it, really Hypothesis is kind of also like anybody can annotate anything. So that I want to, have my students go out and actually annotate in a larger setting too, not just the class discussing online. So kind of a massively open online reading kind of thing, a more or that. So I'm kind of interested in people's experiences with it on the class level, but then also I'm particularly around the elections coming up a year from now, as things heat up. Like, where are people?
They're going to get hotter? Go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I think it might. So like, where are people talking about? Like, if there's a State of the Union, is there a page that's, Jeremy, you might point me to where people are having those conversations, but like everybody's having a conversation about something, if that makes sense. So kind of on a class level, but then also I'm interested on a wider level, larger level.
There's a big project about annotating articles about climate change, and that's those. What I love about it is because it's a great example of just straight disciplinary literacies too. Because I'm working with teachers. But there's a good group when an article on climate change comes out, whether it's from science deniers, from those who don't believe in human science deniers. I'll just call them science deniers in climate change, and others. And there's like a community around that has been annotating those articles. It'd be fun to do that with other fields, like in English. That'd be a lot of fun, especially with all the open domain text. Like, why aren't we just going to Project Gutenberg and reading, the text there and annotating on that page in the HTML?
So as Chris Rogers introduces himself, go ahead, Chris, and then we'll get.
Paul, you could have went, man. I'm chilling. I'm hanging out.
We want to get you in here.
I'm Chris Rogers. I'm in Philly. I am a technology coordinator. I rarely talk about technology nowadays, though, but it's good to come back and sort of hang out and hear about things like RSS feeds. And one of the things I'm teaching at 8th grade language arts class, and one of the things we're trying to build up, we're using Google Classroom right now, but trying to build up a way where students feel comfortable talking in a like an informal, non-assessed way. It seems like my students, this is very early, right? But it seems that's been a thing of just like, well, I know you're thinking about this. What do you have to say? And then they always go into sort of like this format of, okay, I want to write about it, but if I'm going to talk about it, is there an assessment at the end? So trying to build a culture of discussion, and so I think about hypothesis in that way, and thinking about how I could do it without the student emails and everything in the middle school. So figuring out that whole portion of it too. But yeah, so I'm here hanging out.
Can you say they were in Google? Anyway, you'll figure it out. Yeah, cool. So Jeremy, let me throw the hosting to you. I mean, we got some amazing teachers here. You know, some of us. What do you want to know from us, or what are you hearing already? Is another way to say it.
Well, I can speak a little bit about what I'm seeing because I spent 2.5 years at Genius working with them on annotation and education. And I'm seeing it sort of with fresh eyes now at Hypothesis for a number of reasons. Larry, I'm really glad was able to join us because he's definitely, in my mind, one of the sort of more amazing projects that we have going on now. And Greg as well, just because Greg's, it's an interesting contrast. It came up before. Larry has brought all the text to his WordPress site, so it's all in one place. And Greg's kids are all over the place at various different resources. He has, one particular website, but they're also going out into the World Wide Web. So there's a couple different ways to use this annotation. And when I was at Genius, we were using it, and Do Now is like this as well. And this gets to what Chris was saying. Genius was a website. You put your stuff on the website. Do Now is a website. You put your stuff on the website. But what Chris was pointing to, I think, is going to be the really powerful thing. I don't think we're totally built for it yet, but we're going to be building out those tools. I think it can be done now. But what does it mean to sort of send kids out into the web to do their reading, and whether that is assigned reading or that is kind of inquiry-based investigation, but be able to follow them and see what they're doing and engage with them and have them engage with each other. And that's like, walking into a library with a class and having everybody find a book, but suddenly being able to sort of see what everybody's doing at the same time. And another difference is that it might be about the election, or it might be about something that's going on in the news that they might really, genuinely have a stake in. More so than Shakespeare. I mean, I think it's amazing to study Shakespeare and great to study Shakespeare and great to annotate Shakespeare especially. But I'm really looking forward to that moment of kind of using the web as the text. Chris will be a leader in that space, I think. And I want to just go back to something that Shantanu said, which is we are going to be working, I think, with KQED and the Do Now kind of projects around annotating some of those primary sources and seeing if that tool alongside of Twitter might be something to help kids engage with the topics there and the text there. So I guess in terms of things I want to know from you guys, because I've been on these talks before and I've given my spiel before, is more just about how you see this. Maybe we can investigate what Chris was saying. I mean, what does it mean to let kids loose on the web and annotate? What kind of literacies will be unearthed and practiced there? But I definitely would like to hear more from you guys. I've heard myself talk enough about annotation for the past 3.5 years. So. But I'm also happy to answer questions.
Yes, so jump in, folks. And yeah, we can deal with the technology stuff as we go, but let's get to pedagogy here too. I think it's really important. How is this going to benefit our kids? How are we going to be able to go out to the universe and have a community at the same time? That feels like a real hard thing we've always had. So those are some of my questions. What are you thinking?
The thing about, I've always been interested in annotation. I like, and the hypothesis is working for me because it's very clean. Mm-hmm. But I was telling Jeremy in an earlier conversation that there are two things that I'm working on. with hypothesis, at least. And one is, kind of careful reading. That is paying attention to the words on the page, really, looking at them, thinking about a text not as a source of information, but as a source of provocation and question making, etc. And so hypothesis, the annotation and hypothesis helps me to do that, with the students, without a lot of direction. You know what I mean? Without me kind of beating and whipping and reminding and castigating, etc. And the other thing, real quickly, is, the annotations also do encourage, I think Christopher mentioned it, a kind of more genial, student-centered conversation about the text. And it's very low stakes. I don't grade the annotations. I'll respond to some of them once in a while with questions and that and whatnot. But really, it's a chance for the students to develop, I think, a kind of community, a kind of way of talking about texts or a way of talking about material that is not assessment-driven. You know what I mean? It doesn't have those kinds of repercussions and self-consciousness. So those are the two, right now, kind of the two of the main things I'm focusing on.
Can I put you on the spot about one thing, Larry? Because I was watching the stream today and I saw the students annotating. I love, by the way, the two sort of ways you're using it, the sort of non-assessment driven, genial approach to the text, and of course the sort of careful, close reading one. But today your students were annotating just with images. What was up with that?
Well, so we've annotated like 5 or 6 texts, and the last annotation we did, I said only ask questions, no statements, no whatever. You know what I mean? So that it's just getting into that habit of you ask questions of a text. You don't come prepared to definitively say this means that. You know what I mean? And also that segues with the classroom kind of in some ways a lot more easily, and the conversation. So for the text, for the Malay text, which they're annotating now for Thursday, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe they're getting a little annotation fatigue, or maybe just to change things up a little bit, but also to prepare them for some stuff later in the class. The thing, for the text today is only annotate with images. Images that comment on the lines of the poem, images that express an interpretation or whatnot. And I think the idea there too is I want them to explore the visual, the multimedia possibilities of hypothesis, and the idea of bringing in outside texts. Hypothesis is a kind of, and the text really as a hub. As Whitman said, the soft-wheeled hub of the universe, for all kinds of talk and action, etc.
I just want to say it was really pretty cool to look at the images passing over the stream. I spent a lot of time just watching the kind of a fire hose of hypothesis, and I knew they were reading this Malay poem, and I hadn't read it before, but I eventually read it because I was seeing all these annotations, but the images were just all over the place. So it was really interesting as a kind of hub. I mean, there were real-life images, there were famous images, there were cartoon images, there were sort of strange images. I mean, I feel like I could have talked, if I was meeting with them tomorrow in class, I could have talked to them for a good 3 hours about, like, what was going on in your heads, because it was really, really interesting stuff. And I think from that, there's all kinds of, there's that kind of, what images come to mind, but I think you can get, more rigorous. You could really focus an entire unit on just like, image and relationship to text and how we use images in arguments, especially alongside of our own text. So I think there's a whole, curriculum to be written just on the kind of visual, pictorial nature of online annotation, which of course I, as somebody who doesn't know how to draw, could never do in the margins of my book. I could always write words illegibly.
But we want Telegram-like stickers. Integrate Telegram-like stickers into
emojis.
Yeah, and animated GIFs, right?
Yeah. But I think what I took away from what Larry was saying, each of those instances, he was providing students with a purpose for annotations, and I think that's so key at the beginning when going back to Paul's comment of pedagogy, because to me, annotating without purpose is just highlighting. And we can highlight with a bunch of junky words, too. And for me, I mean, your purposes fit in English. Like, I have one book that the kids are annotating that they have to read because they have to pass, like, a test, like a state-certified test. so they do have to read for information, and I have to work on like versus the other texts where I want them to critically reflect and do the things like during Larry's class. So I've had to really think about different kinds of purposes and how annotations change when, yeah, you basically, I'm trying to create in one a public study guide because there's a reading test you have to take to become a teacher, and the other a community reflective piece. So I want to steal again from you again and really play with like each time I assign a text to give a specific purpose for the annotations. I like that idea.
So in both of those cases, though, is it just your students in those texts at this point?
Me?
Well, yeah, but I think in every use case we've talked about recently in the last 10 minutes, it seems like it's just your students there, which is not a bad thing. I'm just asking.
With Greg's, I mean, Larry's, you'd have to find his student site, right? I mean, it's a class website. It is public, right? So we can all look at it, but you'd have to stumble upon it. You're probably not going to do that by searching Edna St. Vincent Millay. But with some of Greg's stuff, right? I mean, that stuff is. I mean, let's be honest here. Hypothesis is not Twitter yet. You know, I hope one day. But some of your texts, Greg, are out there in the web, right? Theoretically, they could be.
They're on the web. Or I hosted them. What I did, Larry, is I hosted PDFs from my WordPress site because I love the way that because I just love the reader. It's a clean, fresh look. Or I'm going out to specific websites that we're annotating, and some of them, they're ones that I try to pick websites that flow through other circles in Twitter that like through the DigPed hashtag.
Hybrid pedagogy stuff.
Yeah, hybrid pedagogy, and so I'm trying to pick text that I know other people might actually find them.
But if I could, I mean, part of behind my question, I think, is that on Genius, one of the wonderful things is that is the community. It doesn't always happen, but often there's a mentor-mentee thing that happens between really experienced readers and young readers because of the community there, right? Is that something that we can see happen somehow with Hypothesis too, or what's the thinking there? I mean, first of all, is that a fair thing to identify a difference? Yeah.
As an outsider, that was one of the best things of Genius was the community, and they held each other to high standards. But at the same time, there was also a bro atmosphere to it too. Sometimes it wasn't all inclusive per se because they did, and it was like held to such a high standard, like the public texts. And then the communities, they would mentor and mentee each other. But because it's with the root in hip hop culture per se, it was just the broad like there's something there that I found not absolutely 100% inclusive all the time.
Yeah.
But the community also helped each other, so it was like it had the bus. It was like the real life. It was just the good and the bad of the community.
I would love to dig deeper in this and hear from teachers because I think there's a lot of different angles, a lot of different aspects of this issue to talk about, and Greg hit on a few, but let me just riff really quickly and throw them out there. I mean, first of all, a lot of teachers, from my experience at Genius and Hypothesis, do not want that. Actually, they don't want a stranger coming into a classroom, and I think that's fine. I respect that. In fact, there's some ways in which that is probably legally tenuous to allow that to happen. And with Genius especially, there was a certain kind of community that was very specific. And there was also a certain kind of annotation. So at Genius, you were expected to annotate encyclopedically. And so high standards perhaps, but also very specific conventions about how one was supposed to respond to a text. For example, you were not allowed to ask questions. Questions were not allowed in annotations. So if you want to have your kids annotate a text asking questions, or defining vocab words that are strange to them but might not be strange to a public audience of average readers, they're not allowed to do that on Genius. In fact, your stuff will be deleted and considered not, contributing to the conversation.
Just a quick sidebar though. It is possible to ask for almost any page to be opened up to individual annotation, however, right? At least anything I've asked for gets opened up right away. So
right, they've
it
since launched.
It does. Yeah.
They've since launched comment, but for the vast majority of Genius's existence, it's been an encyclopedic space. But I do think something that to go back to something that Chris mentioned, that for the teachers that do want to engage publicly, and this is also the difference between like the people that are on the Genius, page, the Genius, website, and who's hanging out there and who actually is that community, versus who might be on the New York Times or the LA Times or whatever your local newspaper is and who's commenting there. How might students interact productively with the comments that take place on a public website that might take place in annotation? So I guess my dream is that at some point we would have, say, on the whitehouse.gov for the State of the Union, to have a public annotation channel. People are instead of on Twitter, they're actually reading the text, the live transcript, and commenting on it as Obama or whoever the next president is giving the State of the Union. But there might also be private channels for students to have their individual conversations, and there might be a way to move in between them and to have students to encourage students to engage with the public conversation, but also a safe place to to have their own as well, or to let teachers decide which one is which. So there's the Genius community at the Genius website, but then there's also whatever community is using annotation at any website, at any platform where a certain conversation is to be had. And part of what Hypothesis is arguing is that it doesn't need to be Hypothesis. It doesn't need to be the Hypothesis client. If we have a series of annotation clients that are based on open standards like web browsers are, then you could be using Hypothesis or Genius if they decided to do it and access commentary on any website.
Jeremy, just sorry to interrupt. Anna, any last thoughts or questions? You say you have to go.
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
No, it was a really helpful conversation. I think I'll catch up with the rest of it later too. I think it is, and what I'm thinking about, maybe just leaving that too, is this question around, do you need a community to have a conversation, and are we looking for extended conversations? Right, like via the replies and that sort of thing, or are we looking for a community of people talking about a text together, or can that community be distributed and not in relationship like we have come to know them, right? Like we think that they are and we're used to. So yeah, those are just the things that are kind of floating around in my brain at this moment.
Well, Anna, before you go, I like having Hypothesis installed on my own website too, just like Larry's WordPress or even mine with Known Sites using the JavaScript plugin. And sometimes other bloggers are starting to do it too. It's a more richer experience for me as a writer than the reply. I have like 3 people read my blog a year, so I don't really get that many, replies. But I do see I have more fun when people are, when we're annotating each other's writing versus just replying.
Replying. That might answer that old problem of people not replying because that they read a thing and they do have something to say, but there's like there's a holdup for a lot of people, and for posting a reply, they feel like they don't have their thoughts all together, or whatever else it is that they might do an annotation.
Yeah.
Engage in the middle of the information with you. That's cool.
Somewhere pulling that all together, and when you have to leave, Anna, we get it. It's fine. It's right. Thank you for stopping. But one of the things that I started to do and want to do more is picking up on what you just said, is actually asking kids to use Hypothesis to comment as they're reading, right, somebody else's post, but then to look at your 3, 4 comments that you made as you were reading and pull those together into your reply, right? So it's a way to kind of sift through your thinking as you're reading, but then there's also something useful about the thoughtful composition of a reply as well. So I think kind of doing both of those would be really interesting. By the way. Others with thoughts? Do you want to push us in a different direction or ideas?
I was just kind of curious how things look like for Greg and Larry. Do do you make conscious connections back to the social annotations? And because I mean, to me, it seems like your students are really prolific annotating, and so they must be getting something out of this. If, especially Larry, you said like it's not even, you don't say like I want 5 comments tonight or something like that, right? But it seems like they have this phenomenal participation, and so how does that play out when you actually physically meet them?
In the classroom?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So what I'll do is before class, I'll sit down and go through the text and the annotations, and then kind of group them. Like, well, the students really seem to be having trouble with this idea of double consciousness in Du Bois, or the students really seem to be grooving on this Frost idea of whatever, this line from Frost, or there'll be a lot of difficulty. I'll go into class and say, hey, Ariana, you said something about X. Can you explain that to us? You know what I mean? And then, Ariana will explain it, and I'll say, and Jesse, you mentioned that. You know what I mean? So it's a great way to seed the class. Really, I think the students get a lot more out of the classroom time.
But was part of your question, Chris, how do you get them to do it? How do you get them to do so much if it's not such a major graded assignment?
Right. It does seem to be, they're getting something out of it, because you could just as easily say, go to my blog and here's a question I want you to, reply to, and so there's something maybe different about the interface and the annotation itself that's they find easier, or they like it more?
Yes. I think they find it easier because it's granular. You know what I mean? It's like 1 or 2 sentences. You know what I mean? So they don't have to sit down and really think, okay, what's Professor Hanley? You know what I mean? In a way, that's the double consciousness of the student, right? I'm writing it, but I'm also thinking what Professor Hanley's going to say when I. So I think one thing about hypothesis is it kind of helps to push that into the background, and it's very granular, lots of small miscellaneous whatever pieces that they can add, very low pressure. And, some of the students aren't really into it, and some of the students resisted, but there's a good core now that kind of, gets to it, is really, interested in engaging with the text, etc. So, does that kind of answer the question?
I've actually, on the opposite end, I've had to not almost break my students from the habits of how many annotations do I need. I just had that same question today. How many do I need to have? Well, as many as you need to annotate. That's how many you need to have. But I need to know my progress in this class. It's a line from, I think, Dan Hickey that
So let me push you on that though. What's wrong with a number? Because a number maybe clarifies the expectation that you want them to be granular, you want them to be, you know what I'm saying?
Maybe because I think it's where they age at my students, because they're on that cusp of adult learners. It's like I'm trying to force them into that. It's time for that number training wheel to come off, and you need to do this because you're a professional and you need to learn. Maybe I do need to put in a number, and that might be something I need to do. But
I do give the first couple of texts. I did give a number. I said 3 quality annotations.
Okay, maybe I should try it then.
Yeah, and for the visual, I said
2 really bad ones, right? I said and 2 really bad ones.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, I think the context for that is I don't give grades in my class. I only give a final grade because the state of California requires that I do so. And I use this patented check plus, check minus system, which really emphasizes lots of, lots of work and lots of credit. So by the end of the semester, I'll have maybe 50, I don't know, whatever, 35 to 50 things that I've looked at and, evaluate or whatever. So it also belongs to that process of kind of evaluation and incentive. It's steady, consistent, authentic engagement, and here are the ways I'm going to support it in terms of evaluation. Because that's my goal, is the steady, consistent consistent, authentic engagement, really. So I kind of had to turn things around a little bit to do that, I think.
Larry, I teach 6th and 7th graders, and some of them are just struggling to learn to read, right? And so as you were talking about provocation and so forth, I was thinking, yeah, but I think there's something useful about that too, So I guess what I'm asking is that, in some sense, your students are still learning to read too, right? Can you? Yeah. What do you?
I think from my perspective, all students are still learning to read. To be honest with you, it's different. It's different kinds of levels or something. But like I've taught graduate classes, and basically have felt in many of those graduate classes that the students still need to learn to read. So, and I think the one consistent thing about learning to read for me, or there are a couple of consistent things. One is pay attention to the words. I said this earlier, but like not the deductive approach to a text, the inductive, work from the words. And I think the other thing about reading is that I try to practice is, of course it's difficult. It wouldn't have any benefit if you were just reading your grocery list, or your, traffic ticket or something. Fine, but we're reading things that are difficult at times because that's where you really get engaged with the text. So I try to, it's really hard, it's difficult, no matter what the level of student is, in my experience, but to really not be afraid of difficulty and confusion, and instead to see the difficult and confusing moments as very, very productive. And I think the annotation tool is really helpful for that.
Yeah, I was wondering a little bit about confidence too. Like, do you feel like students, when they're doing the annotations, are they starting to find a voice through that medium too, that's different in a way that they do in other activities in your class?
I think so. That's a really good question. And you know what? I've had to look at that. I had a student the day before yesterday, whatever, came up to me and said was very concerned about his annotations, that they weren't what I was looking for. And I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm looking for except these very general kind of things. And then I went back and looked at his annotations, and I think what he meant was that his voice in the annotations was very different from the other students. This was a student who's really into literature, who, has read a lot, has a lot of background in English, kind of. And so his annotations were kind of much more, when we read a poem, his annotations are much more like, well, this is iambic pentameter, and it looks like it might be a sestina, but perhaps, you know what I mean? I'm not sure if it's a sestina or a rondel.
Oh.
So
I would argue
more discipline-based, yeah.
I would argue that for Larry's, the text that Larry has in his anthology on that WordPress site, that some of them have to be absolutely, those texts are all inherently interesting. They're all great works of literature. But in terms of somebody seeking something beyond the text itself by Edna St. Vincent Millay, your students at San Francisco State have created some of the most interesting versions of those texts in existence. They have produced them. They are the scholars of them. They are the creators of that interest. That Edna St. Vincent Millay, as quirky as those images were, that's a pretty cool version of that poem, with all those crazy images popping out of you. Like, that is something worthwhile outside of the class. And in fact, I don't know how Google search works exactly, but they might get there. And I think if you can get that into the kids' minds as they're working in a class, whether it's high school, even if it's middle school, like, hey, you have something to say about the State of the Union. You're a citizen of the United States. You live in the United States. You have something to say here. It's worthy. That confidence, I don't think is, always so easy as I'm describing it, but I think aspiring to it and encouraging it and saying, like, Greg's class, those are all education majors, right, Greg? And a lot of the texts that you're on are interesting to an education-y type of audience, and if I happen upon them, as I do in my line of work, to the stuff that you guys have annotated on the open web, they absolutely make those texts more interesting, for me to see them, because these are kids studying education, commenting on education texts, and they're like, oh, okay, now I've got stuff going in my head beyond the text, and it's great.
I almost wish I would have used the canonical link to Dana Boyd's "It's Complicated" to
I
her,
look at that
her
one I've been
media
looking
version instead of using the one on my website, so they could have grown over time. I think for next year I'll switch to using her public link because I think that'd be a text that's ripe for social annotation.
But then one question I want to ask, and Chris brought this up, and I'm really curious about because I've thought about this, but I need to know from people like Chris, both Chris's and Shantanu as well, like what does it mean for your kids to suddenly go out and annotate the Detroit newspaper or the Philly newspaper or the New York newspapers, and to be out to either see the public comments there, whatever that means, good or bad, and to contribute there privately or publicly? I mean, what would you be looking for there? And also going to what Chris mentioned earlier, which is like, what if it's not all on the same article? What if it's just let the kid go and annotate whatever he wants in the New York Times or she wants in the New York Times? And then what are you looking for in those annotations? It feels very. I'm a literature professor, so I'm in Larry's camp. Everything he says resonates for me. It's like, we're reading the poem. Look for stuff inductively in the text. What does it mean? This is nothing new really for English in a lot of ways study. But if you send them to the New York Times and you're just like, read whatever you want, and I'll be looking at your annotations, or let's all read this op-ed article that's incredibly controversial, and I want you to say something publicly. I mean, there's just a whole can of worms there that I'm really excited to open. I think they're going to be really good for students, but I'm scared. I didn't teach public school when I taught high school. I didn't teach middle school, so I'm scared about what that looks like and how we're going to guide students there and what are the pitfalls.
So Shantanu, could I point to you? And answering some of those questions, but just in more general, what did your students say when they used it?
Well, when they started, it was first of all, oh, why did we have to do this? And then it was, oh, this is cool. And then they started to screw around with jokey responses, but then I said, it was three thoughtful responses, not three jokey responses, and so they got down to work there.
So we have the number down, 3 thoughtful. Yeah. Okay.
Numbers are important.
I'm playing. Go ahead. Good.
Because without the numbers, some kids won't respond. So
Shantanu, when I introduced it, one of the students said, they're on a it's a closed literature system, and so doing annotations on that system doing annotations was not new, and doing them on a screen was not new to them. But he said to me, I never do the annotations in that system because who's going to read them, right? But he got excited about the fact that these were going out to the web and other people might see them. So it sort of, that audience gave him purpose in an interesting way.
Well, when I introduced it to the kids, what I did was on a projector, I just put the hypothesis stream right on there so that the kids could see the stream of their comments, and so they were actually doing it in class,
That's cool.
reading in class, annotating in class, and so I was showing them what they were doing, and then I was responding to that stream as it was going along with questions and comments, and sometimes I would just I would just read and instead of writing it, I would just talk to them about what was going on here. So that started a conversation. Now this year, what one thing I'm planning to do in advisory is that's something I've done in previous years was I've had the kids I've printed out an article from the Times and had them read it, and then we would have a conversation around that article. So what I'm planning to do this year is on Monday I would show them, I would give them the article and have them annotate it in with hypothesis, and then with that with that stream of written annotations, then going in on Tuesday and having a conversation about that in class. So that way they would have a lot of written stuff that they have produced in class and perhaps at home that they would be able to then use to respond. And I'm hoping that our conversations will become a lot richer because of that, because they have a lot of stuff already written by themselves on the article.
Could we talk about tagging for a second? And/or Larry, you mentioned that Shantanu, as you were talking, I was thinking it'd be nice to categorize them the way Larry does, right? Like 5 of you have this issue, 3 of you seem to think this. And is there any way to do that in the tagging? There's no way for us to add to somebody else's tag, right? Or somebody else's post.
No, but that's actually a feature that I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about it in more rigorous situations than Larry mentioned, but I thought that we could go through text.
Jeremy, we're losing you a little bit. Try again. Oop. He's auto-tuned. Yeah, that's right. Well, try again, Jeremy. Go ahead.
When I did my project for Question the Web, I created a Google Doc and we crowdsourced a code book of tags around argumentation, because it was a project on teaching argumentation to middle schools. That's what the project was. And we went through we did a hangout just like this, and we jumped into a Google Doc and we made a code book of argumentative tags that students would then use in a hypothesis. So I think we made code books. Making code books for annotating is something teachers have done forever.
What do you mean by code book?
Like, just think about, use a plus sign for main idea. Like, think about how we've always taught kids to annotate. Like,
I see.
Question mark for a question. We came up with, this is a source, this is evidence, this is uncredible source. And, like, we developed, I'll look through I'll look for the doc, but we tried to develop a list of codes, a code book, and then hack it by using the tags as a way to really annotate documents for argumentation.
Jeremy, you're
Can
back.
I try again? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
So that's a great hack that Greg was mentioning there. But I do want to just mention that we're hopefully actually very soon going to launch 2 new features. One probably within the year, and one not till next year. But first, one would allow a teacher to set a set of terms that they want students to annotate with that would create a drop-down. So I'd be able to sort of, on Larry's WordPress, for example, there might be 5 things. I know you're not annotating this way, Larry, but you might have meter, theme, imagery, whatever the 5 elements you want the kids to look for, and they'd have a drop-down in their annotations. And so each teacher would be able to pre-populate annotations within, say, a group, which is another feature that we're about to launch.
Or Youth Voices or KQED could be those too, right?
Right. I mean, some of this stuff can be done manually, right? It's a little bit of a pain, but if we start, all your kids.
No, but I mean, in the drop-down, there could be a Youth Voices drop-down. I mean,
sure. Although I think it'd be more interesting if they're choosing between different things. Like this is going to be these. Let's look at this text just through the meter annotations and talk about meter. Let's look at this text just through the historical allusion framework. But another thing that I want to do down the line, which I'm hoping to get some funding from some major granting organization named after a famous computer person, which would allow the teacher, as you were saying, to go into an annotation, to go into a student annotation and say have a drop-down. I'm not, I don't want to get into the politics of the Common Core, but whatever the learning goal, whatever the sort of terms are of the learning goals, this fulfills this requirement drop-down, so I could go in and assess an annotation, say it's fulfilling one of 5 or 6, 10, 15 learning goals, and then I'd actually be able to have a second drop-down that was my evaluation of it. That was, it's on a scale of 1 to 10. This is a 10 of 10 in terms of use of textual evidence or something like that. And that also would not be, that would also be able to be populated by whatever the learning goals of the community were. Could be the Common Core, could be the science standards, could be your individual learning goals that you want to assess. But to allow, as Larry or I think you were suggesting, the teacher to go in and somehow label or tag an annotation for grading and other kind of metrical purposes.
Mm-hmm. It's 10 o'clock here in the East. Karen, do you have any last thoughts for us? Sorry, I didn't tell you I was going to. About how, like, you're our community manager. Is there any kind of thoughts about how this might work in a community?
I've enjoyed this conversation. It's really interesting. I mean, I think one of the pieces that's interesting to me is the idea of that really granular level and doing a WordPress plugin and having it be just really simple. And I'm thinking about how much more prone people are to putting little post-it note comments on a Google Doc than they are to replying to a blog post or doing sort of maybe more complicated annotation.
Right.
And I don't know enough about Hypothesis to know like if that makes sense. But I think low barriers of entry is what gets people in, and so that's really interesting to me.
So just to note, just to note that anytime a post on Youth Voices is put into a mission, it then becomes annotatable through Hypothesis. So just worth, and all profiles are also. So it's a way for kids to give each other feedback on their profiles.
And do you know how much that's being
other
used?
integrations? No, not after this conversation. It's going to blow up.
Well, maybe some of us like me should go in and just add notes to things so that people go, oh, how did that happen?
Or yeah, I mean, we just need to make it work. Yeah.
Do you not have to log in to Hypothesis to do that?
You do. You have to have an
Okay.
account and you log in. Yeah.
Don Bradshaw is running an open community class on badges, and they built their class kind of in Git or in Git pages, and then they're using Hypothesis for all of the social interactions. So it's just a neat little thing to watch too.
So my last comment is none of this is either or. Like I suggested earlier, I think having like a quick comment and then a more thoughtful reply at the end, I think is a great idea. That kind of stuff and so forth. So Jeremy, but you get last word here tonight.
I just want to thank you for having me again, and thank everybody for their thoughtfulness here. I hope this is the beginning of a lot of individual and community conversations. I'm really trying to build the kind of education community that I built at Genius at Hypothesis, and I welcome feedback. There's some education resources that I put up on the site that I'd love your feedback on, or if you're using Hypothesis and you have assignments that you'd be willing to share, like let me know and give me feedback. And conversations like this give me ideas for feature requests, and so I'm kind of counting on you guys to help guide me through the developing curriculum around here and developing community and developing the best features that will support educators. And feel free to reach out to me anytime for conversation or for suggestions or for help getting started or for troubleshooting while using Hypothesis and web annotation generally.
And about a month ago, you were on Educator Innovator, so people should go back and check out that video. And there's another sort of open conversation happening. Is it the 22nd or it's Tuesday, right?
Yeah, there's going to be there's some. I think that's going to be kind of a circumscribed conversation with some NWP teachers, but there's something brewing with KQED, NWP, and Hypothesis around the 2016 election, and we're going to need a lot of teachers involved in that, and I think we're going to have some preliminary conversations next week, and I'm really, really excited about it, so I hope that Shantanu and Chris Rogers, Chris Sloan, others that have been involved with Do Now and with other NWP initiatives will be on call to help us think through and build something really awesome for the 2016 election, especially since we missed whatever happened tonight.
We did? No, okay. Yeah. Thank you all. And just to say, my K-12 online conference video that I'll be putting together after the next 2 weeks here, and as I think about things, will be about social annotating, and certainly Hypothesis will be part of that. So I'll be talking to you about that. And Karen, say more about when and what's about all that.
Sure. So the K-12 online conference, for people who are not familiar with it, is a completely free non-commercial online conference that runs asynchronously, and all the content on it is open license, so people can remix and share and do whatever they want with it.
And we
And it
annotated with
is
Hypothesis, though.
absolutely. We didn't talk that much about those videos, but yeah, it's video content, so that would be awesome. It starts, there's a pre-conference keynote on October 12th, and then the main conference runs from the 19th to the 30th.
Great. Thank you for stopping in tonight and your thoughts, and we will continue. Next week, Dan Dorenberg from NowComment will be with us, and we'll be talking about similar kinds of things with him. We do this every Wednesday at edtechtalk.com/TTT. Dave Cormier and Jeff Lebo founded that several years ago. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.